theory has to have a priority.
Capitalism and artificial intelligence are the same thing.
The dimension of the future has disappeared.
There is actually no representation anymore.
There is no final resolution to contradiction.
Militant proletarian snake handling over abysses never gets much wilder than this.
Hello and welcome. I am Nick.
Nick Headroom.
Broadcasting live from the digital domain.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Dangerous Maybe. And we are once again joined by the one and only Nick Land for a very unique conversation, very important topic Nick is going to discuss with us today, and that is time and his theory of time. And this is absolutely an essential component of Nick's work. And yet it like the numogram is also difficult to understand. It is, Nick's been working on time since the beginning of his work and always comes back to it, but in a new way with new terms. So there's an ongoing development of this. And you can see this starting in the libidinal materialism of Thirst for Annihilation. The developing this theory of time is in the writings of Feng Noumena. It goes up to Timplexity and an essay like Teleoplexy. It's there in your thinking about Bitcoin. So time is just a constant in your work. And yet there's not really just the one piece somebody can go to and really get your theory of time. And so here you are. We're here with Nance to talk about time. But before we get to that, Nick, Nance, what's going on?
Just hanging out, man. So before we started recording, we talked about quite a bit of things, and talking about King James version of the Bible and this and that. I think for me, I'm a filthy heathen, so I have to do a little bit of extra work to get that stuff to click for me and to really understand why is it important. So like people in the West will often characterize themselves as cultural Christians, if not devout practicing Christians. I'm something else. I'm a cultural consumer. So things like Star Wars and Star Trek and Blade Runner, they bear maybe not the same, but a similar significance to theology with other people. But one thing for me, and it must have just been timing. I was young when this movie came out called The Land Before Time. So for me, the concept of time has always really kind of set my brain on fire. I love Bergson for time. I love Merleau-Ponty. Like I love phenomenology and thinking about time. And I've always thought of time, Kant on time. I've always thought of time as something really important, but it's always dissatisfying when you go to read philosophers talk about time and people try to theorize what time is. And I think that probably has to do with the very nature of time itself. Like we can't ever say the final word on time, because then we wouldn't be here to register the fact that we arrived at the final moment. We culminated on the promise of investigating time. but time for me, time is along with capital, subjectivity and the being of human and all these things. Time is another one of these things that for me, it's a big marquee issue, a big question. So I'm here for it. I'm excited. I think it's appropriate. It's the beginning of a new year. What better time than now to talk about time itself?
Exactly. So, Nick, thanks for being back with us. We have been looking forward to this one for a while. And yeah, I guess just kind of like with the numogram videos, I think it's best to just say, Nick, where do we start? How do you want to kick this off? Take it away.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a great delight always to be with you guys in conversation. I don't know whether to appreciate Nance's remarks more than hit the slogan on his hat, both of which seem extremely opposite to this whole thing. So obviously, like as Nance is saying, it's like the new year. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit. And there's room for a certain amount of just cognitive dissipation around this time. So, preparing for this talk was kind of had a meandering quality to it. And my starting point that I arrived at, like wandering around the city here, is in the time basement of the Devil's Library, where I came across a little text that says, "You have been dreaming of twin serpents guarding a sacred secret. If you do not yet remember such dreams, soon you will. They tell of the mystery of time." So, of course, I thought, wow, this obviously has to be where I start in this conversation. Thank you, Lucifer, as always. And it threw me back to stuff we were talking about before. I think, particularly in our second numogram talk about the I Ching, because the I Ching is the Chinese philosophy of time, done numerically, and I can't remember exactly what we managed to cover in that, but I'm pretty sure we didn't cover enough. The thing that I think we did cover, but it might be useful for people to have some kind of reprise of this material, is that strangely, although ultimately the I Ching is a decimal system, which you can sort of discover indirectly, it ends up being based on a very solid and consistent system of 6 phases of time. And at that point, we were like mapping this onto what was the original name was the time circuit of the numogram. And the key connection, and I won't revisit all of it, it goes in actually quite precise details. It's that the I Ching involves twin triangles, trigrams, making up a hexagram, and it goes in this fixed order. It's a perfect cycle: 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, and they are the binary powers, endlessly repeated. If you protract the binary powers to eternity and digitally reduce them, it's just a consistent, repeated cycle: 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2. That's the Chinese model of time, except I left out one important part of that. And this is our twin serpents. The twin serpents, and this is a rabbit hole. So I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. I'm just going to stand at the edge of the rabbit hole. And the edge of the rabbit hole is the fact that any sufficiently adequate sense of fatality would expect there to be non-coincidental patterns at all kinds of basic cultural levels. And one of those very basic non-coincidental cultural levels is our numerals. And the twin serpents are represented by the numbers 2 and 5. 2 and 5 are twin serpents facing in other directions. They're recapitulated in the alphabet by the capitals Z and X. And 2 and 5 are obviously the only prime factors of 10, and therefore the basic of the decimal numeral system. So with 2 and 5, with our twin serpents, we have decimal, iconographically represented. And we've already seen that in the Chinese philosophy of time, that 2 produces the cycle of time. Through pure, you just simply carry on accentuating the binary powers, and you get this 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7. Now, something very interesting happens, which I am pretty sure I haven't talked with you guys about up to this point. When you say, well, okay, that's 2, what about 5? So do the powers of 5. The first, of course, is 5. Then the next one is 25, which is digitally reducible to 7. The next is 125, which is digitally reducible to 8. The next is 625, which digitally reduces to 4. The next is 3,125, which digitally reduces to 2. The next is 15,625, which digitally reduces to 1. So actually, you can produce the iron law of 6. We can produce the structure of the I Ching with absolute perfect fidelity by doing it entirely in the powers of 5 rather than the powers of 2. Even if you didn't know anything about the powers of 2 or that pattern whatsoever, if all you were interested, if you're obsessed with 5, you would get the same pattern. But of course, as you can see, it goes backwards. So at the most elementary level, when you just have nothing but decimal numeracy, when you have nothing but decimal numeracy, it's 2 basic factors. All you do is the most fundamental operation of just running up the higher powers of these numbers of 2 or 5. You get the I Ching, you get the iron law of 6. You get this pattern, and you get it running in 2 opposite directions. So I think we're already seeing that it just at this incredibly simple level, that decimal gives you this structure of time, and it gets it as fully reversible. The 2 prime factors of 10 run time forever, run the structure of time forever in opposed directions, neither obviously favored. So the reversibility of time is built already into decimal numeracy. And I think it's kind of, I mean, just to pause, it's kind of a bit crazy. Like 10 is quite a small number. I mean, it's quite a small number, and you have this insanely kind of sophisticated pattern that you've got already. Just all you've got is 10. All you've got is 2 times 5. All you've got is your hands. And with that, you have this structure of endless 6-base temporal structural pattern running in 2 different directions. That's just decimal gives you that already. If you do decimal numeracy, that is there. If you just haven't unpacked it yet, if you're not seeing it. So they're the twin serpents. 2 and 5, guarding the secret of time. So what's the secret of time? I mean, lots of this would already maybe seem to be like the secret of time, like maybe, oh wow, time runs backwards just as consistently as it runs forwards. Isn't that the secret of time? No, that's not the secret of time. That's like you're not even got, you're just at the starting point when you're seeing that. That's just time. That's just time in its most fundamental. That's screen time. What's actually like behind the screen? What's the mystery of time? And for that, I think I'm not going to wrap it on forever, however it might seem. I'm just going to do one more little stretch now. A very nice introduction to this the next step, the secret, is the word numerology. Now, I've already had a conversation with you guys about numerology, and especially with against numerology, which I won't talk about now, but is awesome. But numerology in alphanumeric Kabbalah has a value of 235. And 235, numerology has 10 letters. 2 plus 3 plus 5 is 10. 2, 3, and 5 are the first 3 prime numbers. I think all of this information is like very communicative. So, and we know that 2 and 5 we've been looking at. 2 and 5 is decimal. 2 and 5 are the prime factors of decimal. 2 plus 5 equals 7, which we know through Masonic arithmetic adds to results in unity, reverts to unity, because 7 triangulated is 28, 2 plus 8 equals 10, 10 digitally reduces to 1. So yeah, that's 2 and 5, they're the twin serpents. And what's inside, what's hidden by the twin serpents? 3. And 3, therefore, is the mystery of time. Like we have a lot of time, we have a lot of time structure even without it. But then when we go into 3, then we're really entering the occult regions.
Can I just say just briefly? And it's interesting.
Yeah,
it's the occult regions are 3, 6, 9, which is 3, and then 3 plus 3, and then 3 plus 3. So 3 is at work in these primary numbers of the outside.
Exactly. If you count all the numbers that are not numbers outside, all the numbers of the time circuit, you will not find any number that is a 3 or a multiple of a 3 or digitally reducible to a 3. 3 is the number of outsideness. And so obviously on this thing, 235, that's just the sequence of it. The inside is the outside. The outside is the inside. That's, we can see already that when we're talking about time, we're talking about something like that. Like 3's in the middle. The twin serpents are surrounding it, they're guarding it, they're containing it, I think, to a very substantial extent. But so it's the middle and it's the outside. Yeah, so like where do we go? So where do we go from that into the question of time? There's two different directions. I think I'm going to be guided a little bit by you, but we'll probably do both. So the first is just to say, in fact, I'll just get into dictatorial asshole mode and just do it my order. Yeah, like we're in a new year. So okay. 2025 is turning into 2026. 2025 is 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 5 is 9. And 2026 is 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 6 is 10. So it's nice. And in the terms that like the CCRU was thinking about these things through, we're basically going into from a Lemurian to Atlantean phase. The relation between we've done together this whole thing. The numogram is about the relationship of 10 and 9, basically. It's about what happens when you crunch down the Pythagorean tetractys of 10 to a tetractys of 9, 0 to 9 rather than 1 to 10. And the fact that by doing that, one completely escapes. I'm saying this is maybe a bit an over emphatic Lemurian type thing. I'm probably still susceptible to doing that. But one escapes unity in the direction of multiplicity. And obviously the numogram, which is obviously among the Atlanteans derided as the demonic numogram, is a figure of multiplicity. Like if you can't pretend that it's kind of ambiguous between an Atlantean or a Lemurian thing. It's not. It's a Lemurian diagram. And therefore it's slanted towards multiplicity, and it's kind of subversive of unity automatically. But we're moving in the opposite direction now for a moment in this year, because our next year, 2026, is an Atlantean year. Specifically, 2026 is 1013, 1013 is a prime number times 2. It's the 170th prime number. I haven't thrashed out enormous detail. Maybe I will restrain myself from going into too much numerological exploration of the number 2026. I'm just going to stick to the fact that 2026 adds to 10. So we're transitioning from Lemurian into Atlantean mode as we pass this new year thing. So this next year is going to be like, yeah, I think we have to try and be Atlantean about it. I know I can see that people are going to be unhappy about that.
What did Nick just say?
Yeah.
I can see that people are going to be unhappy about it, but it's like the relation of the Atlanteans to Lemurians is very much like the relations of Christianity, paganism. Like, even if you're super sympathetic to paganism and extremely hostile to Christianity, is Christianity basically preserved while containing paganism? All the to a ridiculous extent, our actually surviving archive of paganism was produced by Christian monks. Snorri Sturluson, everything we know about Nordic religion, Nordic, whatever you want to say, mythology, whatever, Nordic paganism, is because this Christian guy, this literate Christian guy, Snorri Sturluson, wrote the shit down. And that's the same. I think the Atlanteans are like, yes, I can see why people don't like them, but I think we get Lemurianism through them. I doubt there's any direct forms of transition. I mean, Atlanteans, we can say, like, Plato writes about it. Francis Bacon writes about it. Dugin talks about it. You know, Atlanteanism, we know from our tradition. Where the hell do we get Lemurianism from? I don't know any Lemurian texts. You know, there's some late weird theosophical stuff about it. But it's like the Atlanteans have actually just preserved civilization, and it's through them that we know any of this stuff. So yeah, this is a little bit, maybe someone could say it's a little bit esoteric. Yeah, but it's an Atlantean yet. Okay, I think you guys should intervene, and then I will just.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, like, because I have like 4 different questions. I mean, one, it's important to state for somebody who is new to this stuff that the numogram for CCRU, be for Nick too, is a time map, and this, what he's been talking about so far relates to the time circuit. There's 4 areas, or 3 main terrains on the numogram: the plex, the warp, and the time circuit. The time circuit is right there in the middle. And the thing is, though, the 2 domains that are outside the time circuit are also time, but they're not time in this sense of what we think of as time. They're eternity. And so the numogram maps time because it shows you the relations of what we think of as the movement flow of time within the universe, which would be the time circuit. But it also shows you these 2 eternal domains that have a relation, that connect in a sense to what we think of as linear and retrochronic time, the movement of time, but they are outside the movements of what I'm here calling universal time, which is to say the time of the known universe. And so the numogram maps time in this precise sense. And so when it comes to thinking about, it's funny, you're right here, but Land's theory of time, there's these 2 approaches. One is to try to understand it through the transcendental, which is the Kantian transcendental, because Nick's work has since the beginning has been influenced by transcendental philosophy that started with Kant. But at the same time, you're not really getting what Nick thinks about time unless it's primarily plugged into the numogram, which is the time map. And so this is part of this, and it's part of the difficulty in understanding this theory of time, because on the one hand, it's influenced by transcendental philosophy, but more authoritatively, it's rooted in the numogram and what the numogram has to say about time itself. So I guess, Nick, it would maybe be a little helpful at the beginning for you to talk about this divide between the numogrammatic and the transcendental when it comes to the topic of time.
Yeah, definitely. So running this whole question through the history of philosophy, and wanting to simplify this to the greatest possible extent, I would just use Schopenhauer's model of the history of philosophy, which is to say, it's very simple. There's Plato, and then there's Kant, and everything else is irrelevant. And Plato stands for a lot. So we would come back to him, maybe try and fold into him all kinds of other stuff. People will be very familiar. I think something we definitely should come back to, the distinction between chronos and ion, which is used by Deleuze, but is a Gnostic distinction. And as a Gnostic distinction, actually is also pointing back into Plato. And Plato, as we know, is the kind of transmitter of the Atlantean tradition. We know of Atlantis only through Plato in any serious way. So the Atlanteanism is a kind of sub-theme, a topic, either a story in Plato. And the Platonic question about time is very simple, which is just that. There's the realm of the ideas, and there's the realm of becoming time. But what is the idea of time? This is not thinkable. This is just strictly not thinkable in Plato. It's the fact that we understand, as soon as we ask that question, we know that something else is required. Like, we cannot simply be Platonists. We cannot simply be Platonists and claim to think time at all. And we'll no doubt return to Plato. But let's just do Schopenhauer's thing and fast forward to Kant, where we have the realm of experience and we have the conditions of experience. And the conditions of experience include time, which is complicated, as we will definitely have to get onto very soon. But let's just take it at a level that's clearly explicitly inadequate even within Kant, which is that time is a form of intuition. There's space and time, two forms of intuition. Intuition is where we actually have kind of experience of objects. And then there are the categories of the understanding, which are the conceptual mechanics of the mind. And beyond anything that can be an object of experience, there's the thing in itself. So then the analogous question to the one we just raised about Plato is to say, what is time in itself? No answer. There can't be an answer to it. We were actually on this a little bit before this discussion, because this is very much like the Quentin Meillassoux question that Mikey was trying to raise. And there's a very interesting discussion in the Critique of Pure Reason, absolutely probably unparalleled as a philosophical discussion about time, which is Kant's discussion of the schematism. Because it's at this point that he makes clear that time cannot simply be a form of intuition, because time actually has to be the machinery that integrates concepts with intuitions. And he says, I apologize to be quoting from the English text here. I feel very bad about that these days, but that's where I am. I have an English copy of the Critique of Pure Reason. The pure image of all magnitudes, quanta for outer sense, is space, whereas the pure image of the magnitudes of all sense objects as such is time. But the pure schema of magnitude, quantitas, taken as a pure conceptual understanding, is number. which is a presentation encompassing conjointly the successive addition of one item to another homogeneous item. Therefore, number is nothing other than the unity in the synthesis of the manifold of homogeneous intuition, as such, a unity that arises because I myself produce time in apprehending the intuition. So the schematism for Kant is saying time has to hold everything together. There's a complete asymmetry between time and space. That even though space is associated with quantities, at the end of the day, what you mean by quantity requires number, and number relies on time. And time is actually going to cross between the concept and the intuition. Time is going to provide the schema that allows you, the whole problem with the schema is about how do you go from a pure concept, like which are all the categories of pure concepts, they're not empirical concepts. It's not the concept of a table, which is an empirical concept. Of course, you can go from the concept of a table to an actual table. It's not something that happens entirely effortlessly, but it's not particularly complicated. But how do you go from a pure concept like causality to a intuitive object, which we know since Hume cannot possibly contain causality as part of its content? And Kant's argument with Hume is the whole of what he's doing on one level. It's like at least it's a driver. And there would be a case for saying that the biggest provocation for Kant's whole intellectual enterprise is to try to understand how causality can possibly work after Hume's empiricist critique of it. There's no appearance that tells you anything about causality whatsoever. So causality comes from outside the object. So how can causality ever be reintroduced to the object? And that's among the things that time has to do, because it's on both the side of intuition and the side of conceptuality. And this is number. This is also number.
Right here is an interesting, I think there's something that needs to be clarified, because yes, the typical reading of Kant, because I'm interested in what you read in Kant, what you interpret in Kant, and how you take that into your own thinking on time. Because what you just did with the schematism is add this layer of complexity to what is typically thought of as the Kantian theory of time. So for people who don't know, it works like this. Kant did this incredible Copernican revolution in the history of philosophy. A lot of philosophers would argue philosophy doesn't really properly start until Kant. And the reason is because Kant discovers a third domain. What I mean by that is, in the history of philosophy, it was traditionally understood that there's concepts in our minds, there's reason, and then there's empirical experience. There's experience of objects. And so this divide was typically it. And the idea is like, okay, we have certain concepts we use to make sense of experience, but the objects of experience basically are what they are, and we receive them in a passive way through our senses. And then, yes, we make sense of them via concepts. But what Kant did is find not just the conceptual or the empirical, but the transcendental. And by that, we mean there's certain concepts and certain forms that the mind imposes on sense data, which gives it a consistency that organizes it into experience as we know it. And that this active dimension of the human mental apparatus had never really been discovered until Kant. And so now we have to make a distinction between everyday concepts, like the concepts of dog or the concept of tree, right? And the objects of experience, dogs and trees. But the form of experience itself is now something the mind actively brings to experience. And so for Kant, time is is the core contributing factor to the construction of experience as we know it. Now, this is hard for people to kind of wrap their head around at first, because they'll sit there and go, so what you're saying is Kant is saying that time doesn't exist outside of the human mind. It's not there in the universe or things in themselves. It's something we impose on experience. And that's a really difficult thing to wrap your head around at first. But what you're doing, Nick, is you're saying, yes, there is this way Kant says time is a form of intuition, which is to say time is a form of perception. But that's not all time is for Kant. And I don't think that but gets brought out very often when philosophers are discussing the Kantian theory of time. And so, okay, the question is, said all that to say this. So the schematism adds this other dimension of time that makes the pure intuition of time, in a sense, possible, right? But in the more just basic metaphysical type of line of questioning, is time reducible to the human mental apparatus for Kant, or is there a time outside of time that we have to reckon with when it comes to Kant?
Okay, this is a great set of questions. Because, okay, let me take a little step back just for 1 minute. Because obviously what Kant thinks he's doing in the first and most reductive sense, and this is like, when I say reductive for him, because this is before we have the schematism. This is when we have, as I think you're right to say, the most vulgar and pop sense of Kant has space and time as forms of intuition. And they are forms of intuition. It's not like that's simply wrong, but it's, in this case of time, it's insufficient. In the case of space, it's actually, I think, entirely sufficient. So I'm open to being bombarded by objections by people, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, actually, if you say in Kant's system that space is nothing but a form of intuition, I think that's completely safe. Time, no. But taking it momentarily as a purely a form of intuition, what it is doing is defending arithmetic from empiricism. Because what the empiricists have done is to say, okay, everything that mathematics can possibly build itself out of is derived from ultimately sense perception. So it's kind of generalization. It's basically you're generalizing from sensory experience. You know what I mean? You've seen things that are more or less triangular. Somehow from that, you managed to kind of generalize the notion of a triangle. Or I'm trying to think what exactly with arithmetic. Maybe I'm a little bit too fetishistically attached to arithmetic to be able to do this easily. But, you know, the thing would be a comparable thing, that there was no foundations of arithmetic outside the empirical perception that arithmetical rules hold. So, you know, over and over again, you've got two stones and you add them together and it's two, and eventually you conclude empirically, well, it seems to be whenever you have one and one stone and you add them together, it's two stones. And every time we've done this, it's been true. And maybe we can assume that that will always be true. So I don't know whether, you know, frankly, I don't feel confident in attributing that to Hume, but that's a parodic, empirical conclusion. And so Kant wants to turn this completely upside down and say, look, you know, mathematics is absolutely secure. It's what he calls synthetic a priori knowledge. Like, it's when we have mathematical truth, we have it with an extraordinary security. There is such a thing as mathematical truth. It's not actually inferior to logical truth. And later in our intellectual tradition, that would be even strengthened even further, I think. That maybe it's even true that we have no conception of logical truth that is stronger than arithmetical truth. Mathematical truth, I should say. So, I mean, there's a huge thing happening with that, even before we get on to the schematism and the complexification of the question of time. Is to basically say that mathematics has an epistemological security that is completely independent of empirical verification. And it's completely independent because the forms of intuition are not derived from objects, but on the contrary, objects must conform, as you were saying, to the forms of intuition. So if you're able to systematize your comprehension of the content, implicit content of the forms of intuition, then you can do pure mathematics with absolute security. And that's what the history of mathematics is. I mean, so already it's very interesting. It's very interesting that that mathematics can have a history, actually. Like, if mathematics is nothing but the explication of the implicit structure of the forms of intuition, then it's not uninteresting we don't know that aboriginally. It's not uninteresting that we have to struggle through history to actually have a history of mathematics and understand what the forms of intuition are. That's at least thought-provoking. But then we have to go another step, because the point is, Kant can't do what he wants to do with that, because he still can't combine a pure concept with intuition. The pure concepts, i.e. the categories of the understanding. As I say, I think that by far the most historically most prominent of these is causality. Kant is completely persuaded by Hume that we cannot derive causality from sensibility at all. Sense experience cannot give us causality. All it gives us is one damn thing following another. Like, if we're saying this makes this happen, we're bringing that to the situation. There's nothing in it that's saying that that's true. We just have X and then Y and then Z, and like, you know, that's all sensibility gives us. So if we want to combine a pure concept with an object, then something extra has to happen. And he says Kant then gets into this whole other depth of time. Space is nothing to do with this. Time does it. Time provides a model for, he gets into the transcendental imagination, like that you can imagine an object that would demonstrate a concept.
Kind of
It's
blueprint,
actually
right?
extremely interesting in his text. Yeah, go.
No, a kind of blueprint, right? Like a temporal rule of the application of your concept to an empirical object.
Yes, like a diagram. It's very close to a diagram, actually. It's very close to the diagram. So he has this fascinating thing that's like operating on so many levels where he says, like, imagine that I'm trying to think of the number 5 and I have 5 dots, and he does the 5 dots, like 5 periods in a row. Like, that's operating on so many levels. Like, it's just like textual. It's like he actually has 5 periods in a row. And he says, like, this is what the schematism is doing. This is a schema. And then you generalize from that schema, and you have these powers of imagination that allow you to see how some empirical object could fulfill an abstract concept. And you're not going to get that either from the side of the abstract concept, nor are you going to get that from the side of the intuition. You can, from the object, you can only get it. The schema, the imagination has to actually produce this diagram that allows you to see, oh yeah, what I'm seeing now in this thing is this concept at work, applied, in the world, operative in the world. Because from the two sides, the appearance, he's so Humean. I mean, he just accepts that the sense is just this foaming, bubbling confusion. It's not gonna give you anything conceptual at all. And the concept, understood in abstraction from time, gives you no reference at all to what it would look like in the world. It's a pure abstract concept. It's only the imagination, which is for him basically time at work, that allows you to have a diagram that says, I can see, I can imagine, actually, literally, I can imagine how this concept would manifest itself in the world of appearances. And time alone does that. Space has no role for him in this at all. It's very asymmetric. But all of that said, that still, for Kant, doesn't get you to the outside.
Right, because the schematism is still part of our mental apparatus, as you said, the imagination.
The schematism, without the schematism, you can't have objects that have any conceptual coherence. You just can't, you can't have just an experience of objects that make any sense. Or you would, without the schematism, you would just simply have this bubbling, foaming confusion of sense impressions. This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. It's like there would be nothing. There would be no objects. There'd be no coherence to it. There'd be no possibility of natural law at all.
And how this is all organized, Kant talks about in terms of 3 syntheses of time, right?
Indeed, yes. Which, of course, Deleuze is a huge fan of.
Right. I at some point, I want to ask you about that connection. A lot to say. But look, so far, what you've been doing is you're saying how Kant is going about explaining how time is an element or force or organizational schema of the mind. So on the one hand, it relates to being a form of perception, but also it's not just a pure receptivity here. The way that time functions in the imagination has this very active component. Now, we can say that the receptivity of time as a pure form of intuition is itself also active insofar as it conditions the receptivity of objects. But right here, this is the dimension of Kant and how he thinks about time that is human-centric. But this always raises important philosophical questions, some of which Kant would just say, see, you're crossing the line of what we can actually know, and you're entering into like dogmatic metaphysics or speculative metaphysics. Because the question I always want to ask once we talk about what he thinks going on with time in the human mental apparatus is, yeah, but how did the mental apparatus itself get here? I mean, there has to be a time before the way the human mental cognitive apparatus
A land
organizes
before time.
a land before time. And right, so this to me, this type of time that we're talking about with Kant is at work on the numogram in the time circuit. Whereas there's these two other modes of time that exist outside it, which would be the time of things in themselves, or noumena. Because look, if Kant, I mean, the thing in itself is similar to the Platonic idea in this regard. They're not part of our temporal world. They're not part of the flow of temporality, but they endure. If you ascribe existence to them in any way, shape, or form, even if that for Kant violates one of the rules, if you posit them, you're positing them as enduring. And if you're doing that, then you're positing them in some sort of time that's outside of the time of the mental apparatus. And so, yeah, I'm curious to know what you think about all that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I sort of feel almost that I need to take a little step back
Okay.
from that, because now this ties up with stuff that we've talked about outside and whatever this particular conversation, because I think there's this question that's a sort of antechamber to what you're asking, which is to do with what's the relation of the human to this stuff. Like there's a reading of Kant, which is to say, okay, and this is maybe to a large extent Kant's reading of what he's doing, that it's like there's man, there's the human mind, the human mental apparatus. I'm sort of drawing the whole analytic structure of this system, and this is what humanity is, or what man is, or what it is to be a human agent, all of this kind of stuff. And I think that's complicated. And we can go in two different directions. I think we have to go in both directions. So let me first just take us back a little bit to the I Ching, to the iron law of six. So iron law of six is we have time just running with equal strength, let's say, in both directions. There's no reason from the iron law of six. There's no reason from decimal numeracy and its grasp on time where we should say things come out of the past or come out of the future. They run in both directions with equal numerical force. You can say the whole thing, we can just run time by doing powers of 5 backwards, or we can run the whole thing doing powers of 2 forwards. Decimal is 2 times 5. Both of those things are equally credible. There's no particular privilege for running time forward in one direction. If this is true, how is there any possibility at all of human agency? If human agency, and it's like standard simple thing, is that we can make the future different. It's completely asymmetric. It completely requires, in our most kind of colloquial common understanding, there's no notion of agency that is kind of perfectly ambiguous in terms of time direction. So even at that level, which, as I wanted to say, is not a particularly deep complication of the notion of time, the notion of human agency is deeply problematic, actually. Like, if things are coming out of the future as much as they're coming out of the past, what do we think we're doing? Like, I don't think it's a normal intuition to think that actually, like, human agency is basically that something's coming out of the future back into the past. there's constructions that are not absurd that are in that direction, but whatever. Let me just leave that as a question. And then okay, so flip over to Kant. And so this whole Kantian structure, we know two things from Kant immediately that are just there in Kant. One, I think is the most problematic, is that there's what he calls the transcendental unity of our perception. So that's the human subject, human, lots of inverted commas, apprehended transcendentally. He snuck the word unity in there. There's massive amount of argument to be had about this. I'm going to say he snuck it in there. I fully recognize that people would say, no, there's totally good reasons why it's there. Whatever. Just hesitate on that controversy. But what we can agree on is that the transcendental unity of perception is distinct from the empirical ego. And the empirical ego, as everyone from Kant at the latest through to your guy Lacan or later agrees, is basically a structural illusion. The empirical ego is a fantasy of the self. It's an idol. It's just a mark of non-sophistication to think the empirical ego is doing anything whatsoever, other than deluding whatever the transcendental self is. So yeah, I think everyone can get to the point, me, you guys, Lacan, Žižek, you name it, Kant, everyone can get to the point immediately that the empirical ego is an illusion and it's not doing anything. And you've not even got started until you recognize that. So what then is the transcendental subject? You're departing from the illusion of the empirical ego somewhere else, towards some notion of true agency, true subjectivity. Okay, so that's the journey we're on. Kant thinks that journey ends with the transcendental unity of our perception. There's a lot of options at this point. There's a lot of options at this point of where you get to, what is your locus of agency? We can all agree what the fantasy locus of agency is. What's the true locus of agency? Now, I'm going to have to say about the true locus of agency that, you take it to a full extreme, I think perhaps over emphatic, but in the right direction, is Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer says, look, Kant's totally right that the empirical ego is bullshit. We have to go to transcendental subjectivity, the transcendental will, and the transcendental will is completely gone. The transcendental will, the will in itself, the noumenal will, is this undifferentiated, oceanic, Wagnerian, Vedantic, mystical unity beyond all appearance. It's it is for Schopenhauer, Vedantic mysticism is, there's no, you go from empirical ego, you're out to there, and so all of that, I've been talking about this a lot because I think it's very relevant to this. I think all of this discussion about Wagnerian, operatic, whatever, is very relevant to what Schopenhauer is saying about this stuff. That it's basically where you get a kind of romantic, late romantic death cultism in Wagner and these things, is because like there's no stopping point short of the full oceanic nihilistic nothingness of the transcendental will, the will in itself, the thing in itself as will, which is for him the same. If once you leave the empirical ego, that's where you go. And I think whoever we think of as our guys are probably intermediate. And I honestly don't know where they stop. Like, I don't know where Žižek stops on this, for instance. I know that he would start out on the same journey. I know he would start out on the same journey and agreeing that the empirical ego is bullshit. I don't think he wants to go to the Wagnerian, Schopenhauerian, Vedantic absolute as the next stop.
It would be negative subjectivity, which is to say,
yeah.
I mean, just for our purposes to keep it quick, we can think of the Freudian Lacanian unconscious.
But not the Jungian.
No, he think he's probably more against Jung than anybody.
Yeah, but it's an interesting, like, why you stop at one particular point. Like, I mean, how individuated is the Freudian unconscious?
Well, then when you get into Lacan, I mean, this is and you're totally right. Like the ego for Lacan, really, there's nothing to be done there. That's why he spent so much time railing against ego psychology. And he was like, guys who are doing this ego psychology shit have totally betrayed Freud. Psychoanalysis is about this unconscious thing. It's not about, buttressing the ego, building up the ego. You've just completely lost the plot. But what he wants to emphasize is that there is this unconscious agency at work, but more or less it's going to be the drives. It's going to be.
But it's at the level of the individual human organism.
And yes, so it would be more of, so the thing with Lacan is, and he gets this from Freud, like our biology for them becomes derailed through being filtered through the symbolic, through language. But it also doesn't mean like we don't still have biological reality. We need a certain amount of calories every day. Of course we do. It's that our natural sense of like, we use our mouth to eat and that's all its function is, right? Our sense organs get opened up to a whole range of possibilities and they can invest in things that really don't have any biological imperative attached to it. So I mean, the basic way of saying, like, the baby's mouth, gets milk from the breast, which is a biological imperative, but then it ends up just enjoying sucking on the breast itself. And this opens up this domain of excess stimulation called jouissance. And so the Lacanian subject is always one geared towards the pursuit of jouissance, which is self-destructive. It's intensity in our central nervous system that serves no purpose except that we enjoy the trouble it gives us. And what human beings do, and part of the reason, it reaches a point where people will go to psychoanalysis, that their drives get so out of hand that they are so disruptive to their life that they got to try to do something to reconfigure the situation, because their unconscious is gotten so far, along the lines. And so it would be a thing though, but it's not the universal type of will that Schopenhauer has in mind. Like, in a sense, these drives are unique to you. Like, you would have your own very idiosyncratic forms of jouissance. I do, Nance does, each one of us do. And so this is where, when we talk about negative subjectivity, it is this part that's completely not the ego. And it's certainly not something that we can consciously just fully apprehend, but it's also not plugged into like one metaphysical principle.
I think
Yes, no, it's interesting. I mean, but obviously, like, let's just for a minute look at Deleuze and Guattari.
Yeah, because they're obviously they're at play here.
They're intermediate because, you know, they would obviously see the individuated organism. They have a polemic against the organism. You know, what is their polemic about the organism ultimately rooted in? It's surely, at least in part, that they think that it's just a kind of arbitrary level of individuation. Like, you're part of a whole bunch of collectivities, multiplicities, whatever you want to say. And your psychic attributes are attributable to all of those levels of machinic organization. So to attribute them entirely to the level of the organism is, to them, you know, like, I'm just going to be agnostic about it at this moment. I'm not in their zone right now. But to them, as arbitrary as attributing things to the empirical ego. Like, you're just idolizing the organism in the same way that the kind of naive, pre-critical psychology is idolizing the empirical ego.
So I think the difference comes, and I start using my own terms at this point because I feel like to keep this clear, it helps. So look, what this negative subject that Lacan and Žižek are talking about, you know, we can call it the unconscious subject. And since the drives operate at the unconscious, yes, there's a linkage between the drives and all. But I think this is, again, me adding something to this, but I think this is how I've made sense. I think when we talk about the unconscious, we just need to talk about consciousness. Now, what I mean by this is there's consciousness with a C and then consciousness with a K is this type of distinction I use. The negative subject, or the subject of the unconscious, it is conscious. It's just egoic consciousness isn't conscious of it. And so there's this other consciousness with us that is aware of events. That's how it's able to pop through in, you know, parapraxis or slips of the tongue or whatever. It's aware of things going on. That's how it can do this. But we so over-identify with our egoic images that we end up thinking, oh, that's me, and that's not me. But the difference is, for D&G, yeah, you know, whether we're talking about desiring machines, these are literally just parts of bodies having impulses to connect to other bodies. The reason that Lacan and Žižek still maintain a subject or a unity is because there is this underlying conscious unity. The thing is with that, now, of course, there's a split here. There's the split between the egoic consciousness and then the unconscious consciousness. So that's the split subject. But the unconscious dimension itself is a negative subject in the sense that the transcendental unity of apperception is negative. It's negative in the sense that it's not a substantial thing. It's not Descartes' mental substance, but it's there nonetheless. And so the usage of negative has to do with how Hegel uses it, where negativity itself has a positivity, where it has an effectivity on things. And so, long story short, the Lacanian Žižekian subject is similar to the transcendental unity of apperception, but here's the difference. It's not focused on knowing, it's focused on desiring. And so that's why we talk about it as the desiring subject. It's the subject beneath the ego, but it's oriented towards around the pursuit of desire and not this kind of epistemological subject that Kant talking about. So, I mean, in this most short, succinct way, that's the way to do it.
I see that difference for sure, but then my question is about its situation. Like, you know, is it situated coincidentally with the organism. Let me just say, like where I'm coming from in this question. It's like, okay, there's the whole Deleuze-Guattari thing. So like you've got design machines at all different levels of organization. All of them have different levels of subjectification, whatever. There's nothing particularly privileged about the individual biological organism. But that's just one whole plane. There's Crowley, who actually speaks to me more loudly, really, where there's your holy guardian angel, which is like, you know, for that, you are like just a video game character. Like, it's like, you know, for that position, for Crowley's position, it's like, if you get all wrapped up in thinking that there's some actually decisive level of subjective organization that coincides with the organism, you're confusing yourself with your video game character. You know, you really think you are like Lara Croft, you know? I mean, you're not Lara Croft. Like, sorry, you're playing Tomb Raider, you're not Lara Croft. And it's like, that's deluded. That's deluded in a pretty much analogous way to thinking that you're your empirical ego. And that's why, you know, when we go, okay, we're coming at this all out of the question of time. We know like time is rolling forward and backwards. You're not going to get any kind of agency of any kind of traditional science. You have to give up on that. You have to surrender that completely, because, you know, the past is not making the future any more than the future is making the past. There's no such thing as a kind of agency, a progressive agency that is in the present, has been conformed by the past and is making the future. No, that's just nonsense. That's just like you can only do powers of 2 and not powers of 5. It's like just arithmetically impossible. The decimal numeral system tells you that's right. So yeah. So why should I believe the level of the organism is for me a farcical level of organization? Like, why should I believe it?
So I mean, you take this one. Why do you think Lacan and Žižek would where they would say no? We're talking basically about an emergent thing.
That I think
emerges.
Yeah, I think subjectivity is this emergent cyborg, and we become, rather than individuals or, you know, dividuation, hyperdividuation, we become some type of cyber individual. Like we are this mechanical organism, this animal made out of raw matter that is I don't know, at the mercy of time, and time can work forward, backward, or totally atemporally, because temporality and time are different. Temporality is this illusion of the subject. But I think the Lacanian point is to say, but something does emerge, and because it rears its head out of this roiling, maybe ocean of atemporality, that's where we find ourselves. We find ourselves already here as these, I think it's appropriate to say cyborgs, these cybernetic organisms. We're animals, and we also have this unconscious, and we also have these mechanisms that, and approaching it from a scientific way, Lacan is trying to make the subject of history the human once again. Like modernity came along and said, you guys think this was about you. No. It was about number. It was about quantity all along. And we see that with modernity and with being able to view acceleration as the phenomenon of modernity. And I think Lacan and Freud even are trying to come and say, but something else has emerged from this mess or from this morass. And that's what we are. So we are the negative subject is co-instantaneous with the biological organism. We do see ourselves as individuals. The ego is an illusion, but that illusion rides around on a deeper structure that is emergent and real.
So, Nick, another way to put it is subjectivity for us is that dimension of us that makes it impossible for us to be pure machines, that makes it impossible for us to be completely identical with a function or a social role. It's this mechanism that is geared towards enjoyment in non-identity with our identity. And that is, if you have a system that's trying to functionalize everything, mechanize everything, and you have this thing that no matter how much pressure you put on it, it can just never fully be identified with what you're wanting it to be. That's this moment or this dimension of us that makes us different than just biological entities, whatever.
Yeah.
We are our inability to be our identities. And that's
I mean,
the
look,
Lacanian subject.
I totally sympathize with the kind of anti-idolatrous dynamic here. Like, like insofar we're not identifying with something that's would be deluded to identify with 100%. My problem is where you draw the limit on that, where with the implicit thing of saying, well, but we stop at the point that the organism, the human organism, is the limit of where we stop doing that kind of critique of idolatry, and we take it seriously. Like, why take that seriously? Like, I don't take it seriously. I can't see why it would be taken seriously.
So I guess, look, when we were talking earlier about various different types of demonstration, whether it's Kabbalah or whether it's this guy, trying to demonstrate the KJV, talking about, I think what the Lacanian response would be is, at the end of the day, Lacan's developing all this to be able to better navigate what he's dealing with in the clinic. And so there is, for him, saying like, look, what I find bottom out in human beings is that there is an enjoyment they get from deterritorializing, to use the term, from uprooting from the identities that some big other, some authority figure put on them. And so on top of that, there's always this struggle for what he calls the ethics of desire, that we're always caught up in the desire of others. We're always having to negotiate what we desire based on what others desire. But what you find is that oftentimes people are neurotic because there is some enduring desire they really, really have that they want to have in life, they want to pursue, and yet they compromise it. And this just eats away at them. And so they can't consciously articulate what all of this is, but this unconscious subjectivity is still manifesting itself in various ways and trying to break out. And so psychoanalysis would help try to facilitate the human subject being able to pursue that unconscious desire. And beyond that, I don't think Lacan himself, now Žižek would come along and add to this, but Lacan himself would just say, well, I can't go into the metaphysics of a will or this broader notion of desiring production as this process in nature, because that's just not what I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know how to respond to the last thing. I mean, up to that point, to say there's this actual clue to a true will that is being subverted or compromised by all these levels of social illusion is pure Crowley. I mean, it's like, the first stage for him, the occult expedition is, find your true will, and your true will, the your is the whole mystery. Is like, it's not your true will, you discover your holy guardian angel, you're opened into these kind of higher domains of agency, for which you're purely an avatar and an instrument in doing that. So like, yeah.
No, I would just add, so here's the thing. At one point in my book, I basically, I connect these dots where I go, when Lacan says do not give ground relative to your desire. For him, that's the ethics of psychoanalysis. That to me sounds very similar to do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And I think they're, coming at this question from two very different perspectives, but nonetheless, they're trying to say you have some sort of, I know this term always causes problems, but authentic desire. There's some authentic desire in you that's always being compromised, and yet it's waiting to be tapped into and pursued with full force. And I kind of see a homology here between Lacan and Crowley, even though they're coming at it from two very different perspectives.
For sure.
But
And
the difference
I
would be
say
there's an idiosyncratic dimension to it, which is to say it's not the Schopenhauerian will. It's more of like this desire is what really defines you as a singular subject. And maybe that's what you would reject.
I don't know. I think it's complicated. I think this is a supremely interesting conversation, actually, really important. I'm not seeing enough of this about. I don't know how many people are talking about this, but they should be more.
Well, this is where I'm going with subjectivity. When I talk about it, this is what I mean, and this is what Nance means.
Yeah. No, it's extremely interesting. This I genuinely think that, and I agree with you on this homology about it, and I think if I was to say I'm less interested in Lacan than I'm in Crowley, it's because it seems to me Crowley is more open-ended about where this is going to end up than Lacan. Like, I assume Lacan has more of an organismic boundary about what he thinks is the kind of true subjective desire.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think there's an openness there you might appreciate, which is for him, it's not the psychoanalyst job to tell people what this desire is or what their desire should be. It's more of providing an opportunity for them to have an encounter with it and then to do with it what they will.
Yeah. Because obviously, if we're on the other side now, we're on some very complicated huge structure. And on this side, the trend is actually, I would say, theological. The trend is through consecutive critique of idolatry towards some absolute unified conception of absolute will. But obviously, as in our previous discussions, there's a completely contrary tendency, which is to go from the metaphysics of unity, or whatever you're going to call it, from the Pythagorean tetractys, from Atlanteanism, through to the disintegrationist tendency of the numogram.
I think
so these two things are, there's a zone of interference between these two tendencies of our conversation that I think is like extremely interesting. And obviously I don't want to go, I'm not heading towards transcendental unity. I hope I've made that emphatically clear. Like, transcendental unity of our perception, either on the individual level or the cosmic level, is not my destination.
Well, look, even though, like you said, like you're not in D&G mode, I still think if we were to do something like that, what you and them, if you decide to work with them and beyond, it would be the transcendental multiplicity of apperception, wouldn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And that's the key thing with the numogram. The numogram is not a diagram of a grand unity. It's a diagram of multiplicity.
100%.
I think that can be thought of as a project that I don't know, we're trying to endeavor to pursue by championing subjectivity. I think you can view this negative subject, as like a fractal offshoot of I don't know, the material history or whatever, time transforming into temporality itself. And so taking up negative subjectivity is a way to allow that multiplicity to emerge. Because I think it's also it could be easy to see the history, at least the history of the planet Earth, moving towards a unity, and that unity would just be pure entropy, like ultimate. We're going to fuck it up, and we're going to keep fucking it up until the sun dies, and we're just like a smoldering pile of ash. So championing the subjectivity, championing this emergent cyborg, is a way to see the multiplicity preserved.
Yeah. Bad future.
So, okay, here's the thing. We've done a long. Okay, so we start with time, and then this question of the human component in the Kantian sense comes into play. That opens up the question concerning subjectivity. So I think now it's almost like, okay, let's kind of reset and go back to time. That's what we're doing here. Just with this idea. So basically, Nick, I guess, kind of cracked this whole thing back into one question. We cannot reduce time just to the human. And some readings of Kant seem to make that what they're doing. And I think with the numogram, and also just what you think about time in more of a transcendental sense, it's important to kind of explore this because, and this is some influence of D&G, I think, on you. The transcendental for them, especially for Deleuze, is not just limited to some dimension of the human mental apparatus. He allows the transcendental to operate in nature, and he called, transcendental empiricism, which to a lot of people sounds like a contradiction in terms. If you go with the Kantian definition of the transcendental as the a priori of the human mental apparatus, well, how the hell could that be empirical? But this allowing the transcendental, which is to say the conditions of experience, to operate in nature the way Deleuze does. So he says, look, the way to do it from a Deleuzian perspective, at least in my reading, is to say this body, the human body, with its brain, with its sense organs, actually only exists on the condition of a certain range of intensity. Like, we know that the human body cannot function and be alive at negative 200 degrees or 1,000 degrees. This range of intensity is the transcendental condition of experience, insofar as it even makes our bodies and sense organs possible. So that allows the transcendental, in a sense, to be freed from the human, and not limited to the human, and allows it to be outside of us. So I think this kind of development of the transcendental and not allowing the transcendental to just be in the human, I have always felt like that was a big influence on you and how you come to think about time.
Okay, that's a really brutal way to answer a question. Because it's not really there's no question mark. There's no question mark at the end of that at all. So yeah, so the key question there is about intensity. Would you say the notion of intensity?
I would say the question is something like this. All right. So if we think time, do we have to go with the simplistic Kantian reading that says time is just this dimension of the human, because time is just part of the transcendental, which is reducible to the human? That position is wrong.
I'm with you. We all agree that, don't we? I think
now
even
why in your words, why is that a mistake? Why do we have to go in this other direction?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think a whole just massively kind of expanded conversation just recently is about that, isn't it? It's like, it's to do with the fact that is agency reducible to humanity. And we've got all these different reasons to problematize that. And I would say the comparatively weak ones are the psychoanalytical ones. And you know, if I was an asshole, I would be like really kind of pushing Jung at you very hard. Because I'm not a Jungian. But I think what Jung is to psychoanalysis is the opening of this same question about why the organism should be considered the actual boundary of transcendental subjectivity, which obviously Jung in this way, I mean, Freud is a much better Kantian than he wants to pretend to be. But Jung, in this one particular respect, is a better Kantian than Freud.
It's interesting to me because I don't see you draw on Jung very much, and so what you see in Jung, I'm interested in hearing because I don't think I've ever heard it before. So
no, I don't talk about Jung much, and it's not. I must read much more Jung, and I've read a little bit of Jung, and I haven't read enough. But on this particular, it's true. It's interesting. I'm not going to go into this. It will too quickly get into kind of random, arbitrary biographical bullshit. But it's true. I've read vastly more Freud than Jung. But I think that I have big problems with Freudians, and my big problems with Freudians we've talked about already, which is that they fetishize the organism as a level of organization that has some kind of pseudo transcendental status to them, which it clearly doesn't deserve. And within the discourse of psychoanalysis, Jung is the person who contravenes that.
Okay.
Like, it's Jung who says, like, fuck the organism. Like, who cares about the organism? Like, what's the organism? Like, go down. Like, the organism, just like the empirical ego is a fetish, the organism's a fetish. Like, let's go down to the racial unconscious, let's go down to the collective unconscious. You know, what is
but see,
yeah.
my question, okay, so trying to zoom out though, like
Yeah.
for you, when you were initially talking about Schopenhauer, I think it's important to come back, which is, you know, this is where you started with libidinal materialism, is that the agency is raw matter itself. And I don't know if you've ever just said it like that, but that's how Nance and I understand what you're getting at, where it's like agency, like whether or not there's human agency is a question, whatever, we can do that. But what is active in the universe is something more fundamental. And I think that trajectory is what we should kind of go from this point.
I mean, I guess we must be running out of time, but let me just say a few things about this, which I think are germane. Like, obviously, D&G, their basic thing is about multiplicity. Everyone knows that. And, you know, I think they do that exceptionally. People would say maybe postmodernism in generally does it. I don't know, maybe, possibly, whatever. Like, I would need some persuading. But I think we've hardly begun, given how serious the issue is. And we've talked about the transcendental unity representation. Like, why? Why the transcendental unity representation? Like, what's going on there? Like, why are we agreeing to that? You know, okay, I'm not going to go on forever on this. I just will say a few more things. Heidegger, who we're all interested in, is super interesting. He was my gateway into transcendental philosophy in a lot of ways. But, you know, you translate Heidegger in English, I don't think you lose a lot on this particular thing that we're now going to be talking about. And you have ontological difference is the difference between being and beings. Okay, well, what's going on there linguistically? Let's just look at that a little bit cautiously. Like, yeah, you're going from a singular to a plural version of this word. Like, beings is the plural of being. And in that, you are dropping from the transcendental to the empirical. You're undergoing radical transcendental degradation. Like, okay, that's actually weird. You know, like, okay, what's the justification of that? What's the justification that when you go from a singular to a plural, you undergo radical transcendental degradation? Like, that's literally what is happening. And it's like, okay, why? I mean, you know, that needs a response. That's like, okay, you've got some commitment there that you're not really being open about. Like, this, I don't know where it's coming from. What's the commitment? The being is at a higher transcendental level than beings. It's not like is it obvious? It's not obvious to me. I mean, so I think there is this thing that's like, yeah, maybe there's defenses. Maybe there's defenses of unity as some sublime category of supreme value conceptually, epistemologically, theologically, in every respect. But I think it has to defend itself much more than it has. And Deleuze and Guattari are in some ways iconically making that case. I honestly think they could have made it harder. Like, I mean, did they ever say that what I've just said to you now? Like, it's like, I don't think so. Like, they've undersold their message there.
It also because they didn't carry with Heidegger's work as much as you did.
I find that hard to believe, but whatever, maybe that's possible.
But I mean, look, there's this important thing tucked away in this ontological difference that has always influenced you, especially when time. Okay, so being is not being, but also being itself is not a being. So transcendentally, time itself is not times. Time itself cannot be reduced to moments in time, be they past, present, or future. And so this difference between times and time itself has always been core to how you approach this, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good objection, but this is exactly where I now am. It's like questioning this, like, is this the right way to look at it? Like, maybe it should be other times. Like, maybe we should not accept that times is just the empirical degradation of time from the transcendental level of time in itself, time implicitly as a unity, to time as a plurality. Maybe that's our problem. Maybe we shouldn't talk about the thing itself. Maybe we should talk about the thing in itself. Maybe we shouldn't talk about time in itself. Maybe we should talk about time in itself. Maybe we should
What
talk
about times in themselves?
Exactly. Like, I mean, what's going on in this absolutely assumed, like, complacent supremacism of the monopolistic mode, and it's like, yeah, of course, everyone who's ever been interested in Deleuze should already have this issue, but I don't see it. Like, I don't see this as something that people are like really dealing with. Like,
Well, I think it's interesting you're doing, because look, as long as I've been keeping up with you, you've kind of always taken the ontological difference as this, like, yeah, of course, it's the difference between the transcendental and the empirical. So I think this, and philosophers, they always are kind of, they don't highlight these moments. I think this is you like doing original thinking where you're even something that seemed to be something that really just you accepted on a presuppositional level. You're like, no, maybe we need to rethink what is going on with the ontological difference itself. And I think that's really cool. And, you know, this idea of, you know, the relationship between being as a unity, the beings as a multiplicity, time as a unity versus times, and say, oh, well, yeah, the unity has to be what's transcendental, but no, why can't the multiplicity be what's transcendental?
Yeah.
You know, so here's the thing. So I'm just for people to know, we plan on having more discussions about time. So this is not going to be like, oh, Nick, like exhaustively do all of it right here now. We plan on making this an ongoing series that we return to, but I think there are some core things to talk about in this first one, and related specifically to your theory of time, and it's these terms, templexity and teleoplexy. And I think, you know, if you could kind of give us an idea of what's going on here. And, you know, I don't know, it was kind of like invisible all these years, but recently I noticed the way you use this suffix plex. I mean, templexity, teleoplexy, two of your most important terms. Well, there's also the plex in the numogram. So, you know, even if you're not talking about the numogram in templexity or teleoplexy, there's this kind of hidden connection just by the usage of plex. And so maybe explore that a little bit if we can.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about it. The key thing I have to say about it is this. The plex, according to alphanomics, is both of the syzygies of the outside. Like it was just a careless mistake of the CCRU pre-Beaconsfield era.
So you're saying the warp and the plex are the plex?
Yes.
Ah.
On absolutely clear numerical grounds, like the plex 153, 63 plus 90 is it 153. It's like it's numerically being shouted at us that is the case. So we just weren't actually numerically attentive enough to even recognize what was happening there. The plex means exactly the outside in those numogrammatic terms.
Can we say that
Clear.
templexity and teleoplexity, like in the etymology there, or in the term plex, there's more going on there than just what you're going to get from the dictionary. It resonates of the outside. So time.
Can you get anything? Does templexity in the dictionary give you anything that it would be?
Well, we thought, well, when we were reading teleoplexy,
I could not even imagine.
Yeah, when we were reading teleoplexy, I think the way we interpret it was just a multitude. Plex has to do with multiplicity.
Folding.
That resonated with us.
Plex is folding.
Yeah, folding. And but also the nature of, like, we couldn't get outside of it being some type of assemblage. Like, yes, it's folding, but it almost recapitulates the word complex itself.
Yeah,
like
sure, 100%.
Yeah.
No, it's got a very rich thing, and I think there is some like weird sci-fi thing that has the plex in it for sure, and yeah, and it's Deleuze in comparison to the plea. I mean, Deleuze is the plea. I mean, it's folding. But yeah, it multivalent.
But in templexity, we should hear time of the outside or outside time, something like that.
Yeah, but folding again, it's to do with non-linearity. It's to do with with recursion. It's to do with folding back. Yeah.
Well,
And
it's
same
fitting
with
that the
teleoplexy.
warp and the plex are both constitutive elements of the plex as such, because they
Yes,
kind
it's
of
well
they
done.
fold onto
Yeah.
fold onto the plex. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, and so Nance, do you have any? What do you think? You got some questions you want to ask related to time?
I I do. And again, time for me, um time might be the thing that really got me into questioning common sense. Um I didn't have a rich religious upbringing to either embrace or rebel against. I was out on my own, so I kind of had to discover philosophy or the questioning of common sense or whatever. And it might have been through time. I've always been fascinated with time and different theories of time, different accountings of time, the difference between temporality and time. Um, the the philosophical history of time is, I think, just necessarily dissatisfying because you crave an answer, or I crave an answer. Being a modern subject, I want something that I can hold in my hands and I can look up and I can investigate. So while there is a rich history of philosophy of time and questioning time, I also think physics and people who even tend towards scientism, um, they're doing interesting things with time, specifically around Bell's theorem, which is a thing in quantum physics, non-realism or non-localism. Like you can't have it both ways. Either the universe is non-real or it's non-local. Um, and this new concept of viewing time that is the Sudoku time, rather than viewing time as this linear thing that unfolds that we participate in, rather than viewing time like the ancient Greeks and Xenu as this thing that can be infinitely broken up and deconstructed, or rather than viewing time as the block universe in which time becomes another spatial dimension and you become frozen. I think the Sudoku theory of time is trying to investigate things like superdeterminism, where the past does have real impact or real influence on the future, in the same way that the future has a real impact on the past. So it's almost allowing for time to flow forward and backward, or what we know of, what we call forward and backward. Really, from time's perspective, it's not forward and backward. It's timing. Time does what time does. But it's, I don't know. Nick, I don't know if you've even heard of like the all at once or the adynamical view of time or any of this stuff from the world of physics. I don't know, but to me, it's fucking fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel there's another conversation involved in this. Would you not say? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
because obviously, of the various potentials for this discussion, there's a hermetic, there's a transcendental philosophical, there's the natural philosophical, there's the scientific. We haven't talked about scientific time. I mean, I don't know how competent any of us are at this shit. Like, you know,
I'm not at all.
It's not uninteresting. It's not uninteresting. I don't know what would happen if we tried to talk about it. It would be unexplored territory. Yeah. But it's all part of solemn providence. Like, you know, it's like we reach the end of history. There's these notions of time. The scientific ones are extremely interesting. Some of them are kind of interesting, but very crude. You know, like the whole block universe thing is like, yeah, it's interesting, but obviously it's stupid. I mean, it's like it's not answering really any of our questions about time. But yeah, it's interesting. It's important. So
Yeah, a lot of there's a couple questions I have that I'm gonna. I think a lot of the questions I still have are better for another discussion. because I think one can open a can of worms on its own. So we would need more time to go into them. I guess this is one that maybe takes too long, but I'm just curious, how much did chapter 2 of Difference and Repetition influence your thinking on time? Because I don't remember you writing much about these passive syntheses Deleuze is talking about there, but yeah, I'm curious if that was always operating in the background of your thinking.
Yeah, I have to say almost zero.
Really? What do you think of that chapter, Nick?
I read that book late, and I don't really honestly remember much influence from it.
Okay.
An intellectual biography, I have to say, is completely uninteresting to me. Like, who gives a shit? But maybe if you do, I had to say, like, it's not much. Not much. You can't. Even Deleuze and Guattari, I mean, I love those guys, but I mean, it's like in terms of refining my understanding of the questions engaged in the transcendental philosophy of time, fuck them. Like, they have nothing to say.
Don't you think Heidegger's better than them on that?
No, I absolutely do not.
No?
Well, better than them. Oh, I don't know, better than them. I don't know. But absolutely dwarfed by Kant in both cases. Like, yeah, like Heidegger neatens things up a lot, but yeah, Kant's the guy. Like, it's like if you're interested in Heidegger, you're interested in Kant. If you're interested in Deleuze, you're interested in Kant. Kant's the source. Like, if someone is trying to say to me, what is it that these guys, Heidegger, Deleuze and Guattari, what do they add at the most fundamental level to your understanding of the philosophy of time, transcendental philosophy? There's nothing. The only point is recognizing that they are within that problematic, and they themselves say that basically almost.
Would you say that so for you, I mean, because it's funny, that first essay that kind of haunts you, Kant,
Prohibition of incest.
And prohibition is that one.
Yeah,
everybody's like, oh, Nick's anti-Kantian, and I'm like, I'm sorry, no, he's not. Like, Kant maybe had more influence on you than anybody, even D&G. And so I think that's clarifying. Like, if somebody wants to study the philosophy of time, you go to Kant at least first, right? Like, who else do you go to as, I mean, who else, who would you put on, next to him when it comes to philosophizing
in philosophy, no one. That people are going to argue that this is good. This is a good. If you put this out of the world, you produce lots of controversy. Yeah, but I mean, I think no one. In terms of philosophy, I think the philosophy of time, Kant, is the end of the road.
What about Bergson? Because I never heard you mention him.
Kant.
I was gonna say.
I mean, not Bergson, Heidegger, Deleuze, Guattari, all these guys, they're all really interesting people, but they when you understand them, you go back to Kant to see what they're actually talking about.
What about Nietzsche and Eternal Return and all that?
Yeah, it's whatever, interesting stuff, but yeah, no, sorry. I mean, in terms of like, I mean, honestly, I kind of have been in a stage where my relation with Nietzsche has almost been like just full gay, but his philosophy of time, the notion that it's philosophically on the level of Kant's, is just a joke. I mean,
what about Husserl?
What? Who we're talking about?
Husserl?
Oh, God, I'm not even. Doesn't even on the table.
I knew I was going to get that reaction. I couldn't resist.
Yeah. No, I mean, throw some other random people on me.
Okay, but
for
here's the
sure.
thing. To me, tell me if you feel like this is fair. I feel like what you've constantly been doing when you work with your work on time and how you apply it, especially to capitalism, is you're using this Kantian framework, but then you're bringing in cybernetics.
Yep.
Is that fair?
Well, I don't know. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't have any response to that. I mean, I obviously think
Well, feedback loops have this
cybernetics,
temporal pull to them that I think.
but cybernetics, I don't really mean Vina, for instance. Like, what is cybernetics? Cybernetics for me is M, C, and dash.
Yeah.
It's the circuit. It's like, okay, Vina, I'm sort of interested in Vina. I don't think he's a genius. I don't. I think he misses more than he sees.
Would you say Marx is a better cybernetician than Wiener?
Ooh.
Yeah, for sure. I do see that. I do see that. He has a cybernetic circuit that is like really persuasive and explanatory of social history. And Wiener doesn't have that. Like Wiener is helpful, is interesting, but he's very one-sided. He doesn't really see it. And the basic point about Wiener that is wrong and that is right with Marx is that Wiener thinks that a good machine is homeostatic.
Yeah.
And Marx sees that a good machine is escalatory. Like a really powerful good machine is one that just gets better and better and better and better. And Wiener has no hint of that. In fact, he thinks that is a problem. He thinks if a machine tends in that direction, it's fucked. So yeah, I think 100% Marx is a better cybernetician than Wiener.
I do think that is predicated on I don't want to say numeracy, but we'll say on number and time in this way, and almost viewing number and time as the same thing, in that the machine that engages in the loop, MC M prime, you're already including this notion of increase, change, more, bigger, growth, this and that, which necessitates a view of time and number, or time as number.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so I think every other question opens a can of worms. I think we should bring this to a close. Okay, so the last thing we'll ask you is I want to go back to what I was referring to earlier with this paragraph from Teleoplexy. And Nance, do you have it where you could read it? It's that section 8.
Yeah, I got it pulled up right here. And we'll skip the first sentence. And we'll get to the I guess the meat of what's going on.
Go for the first sentence. Come on. I mean,
okay,
come on.
Okay.
Just one sentence. Do it. Do the whole thing.
All right. So I'll read the paragraph, and then we can go and get into it. Techonomics is a Google-strewn word of irresistible inevitability, repeatedly struggling to birth itself within myriads of spelling mints. It only remains to regularize its usage. Quite different is a true neologism, but in order to designate modernity or capitalization in its utter purposive twistedness, it is now necessary to coin one. Teleoplexy, at once a deutero-teleology, repurposing purpose on purpose, an inverted teleology, and a self-reflexively complicated teleology. Teleoplexy is also an emergent teleology, indistinguishable from natural scientific teleonomy, and a simulation of teleology, dissolving even super-teleological processes into fallout from the topology of time. Like a speed or a temperature, any teleoplexy is an intensive magnitude or non-uniform quantity heterogenized by catastrophes. It is indistinguishable from intelligence. Accelerationism has eventually to measure it or disintegrate trying.
So what we were trying to understand is, are there important subtle differences between teleoplexy, teleology, and teleonomy for you?
Yes, interesting. What a lot of these things offer, I think that there's a genre of questions that are very like yours. And the question is, are you going to try and actually usurp words from other people, or are you going to just differentiate? This is a huge question, actually. This is Catholicism versus Protestantism. This is like massive. So, teleology, like at a certain point, modern history decided that we're going to give up on teleology. It's just fucked. It's Catholicism. It's like, it's like for the Protestants, for the Reformation, it's like we've lost this. This is everything we're against. So fuck this word. Fuck teleology. Fuck Aristotle, actually, implicitly. We're going to just not do it. And that was really creative. I mean, it was important. But then at a certain point later, it's like natural science said, well, we want to talk about stuff that actually is a bit awkwardly like teleology, but we're Protestants, we're modernists, we're not Catholics, we're not traditionalists, we don't want to use that language. So what are we going to say? Well, okay, so teleonomy then appeared, which is a great word. I love it, actually. But it was very political, actually. They could have said, let's grab teleology of these fuck Catholic assholes and make it into something interesting. They didn't say that. They said, we were surrendering teleology to those bastards, and we're going to just coin our own word because, we've lost it. It's theirs. We know it's theirs. There's no way you can grab it off them now. We will have something else. So let's just start with that. Teleology and teleonomy. Is there really a difference between those things? It's, if you scrub off all the politics, there's a very difference. If they'd said, rather, let's just try and actually have a notion of teleology that isn't fucked by Catholic theological prejudices, that's what we mean by teleology. Could they have done that? And would that be exactly the same as teleonomy? I don't know. Maybe, but they thought that was a hopeless undertaking. So what's the difference between teleology and teleonomy? Interesting. Seriously. I don't mean that casually. It's seriously interesting. And then, sorry, what's the last stage? Teleoplexy.
It's yours.
Yeah, teleoplexy. Well, teleoplexy is like, I think, neutral on that previous question. It's not saying teleology could have been redeemed, it couldn't have been redeemed. It's neutral on that. But it's just saying, let's just twist it. That's what Plex says. Yeah. Let's just twist it more. Let's just twist it more. No one's done this before. So if we say teleoplexy, we're not going Catholic. We're not going anti-Catholic. I mean, I'm really fine with that right now, but whatever. We're not doing that. We're just, this is a different thing. Teleoplexy. We're just saying we're keeping the teleo thing. Oh, and by the teleo thing, we mean retro time, retro chronology. That's all.
Yeah.
With lots, and plexi means lots of non-linearity, lots of twists.
So
That's it.
with the teleo, I mean, purpose is in there in some sense, right? Because, I mean, in the sense of, look, I just will kind of own it. The way I view it is the purpose of all of this helioplexic capitalistic activity is the production of artificial intelligence. And so that's ultimately the purpose it's being pulled towards through these various machinic assemblages.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that
it has a destination. It has a destination.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I like that. Well, Nick, I think this is a perfect spot to end. And, this has been great. Definitely, we plan on, doing another one in this series, another one in the numogram series, at some point in 2026. And so, everybody, this is the first of an ongoing series that we're going to kind of chip away at. I definitely, next time I would like to get more into some of the details of Nietzsche and Bergson and Deleuze and Guattari on time, even though Kant is primary here. And I'd like to connect it, to how time was, operating in the CCRU writings, and then especially, this relationship between Bitcoin and time that you were working out about 6 years ago. So I think
there's a lot. There's a
lot of cool stuff to explore.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick, for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
No, it's so good. Okay.
Hell yeah. Talk soon.
Awesome.
Talk soon. Okay, keep doing your communist weird stuff, and I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
All right.